Good evening. Tonight we're talking about 2001 A Space Odyssey with Michael Ventura. So why don't you take it away, Michael?
Okay, I'm really eager to hear what you got to say about the symbolism, but first I can give some historical context because when 2001 came out in April of 1968, there hadn't been a major science fiction film that anybody had called major since Forbidden Planet. And that was considered a serious science fiction film. And it did have the wonderful metaphor of monsters from the id. And But mainly the science fiction films of the 50s, a genre that seemed to have died in the 60s, uh, were aimed toward the new youth market that went to the movies, from the age of 6 or something, like we did, and uh, and they were basically space invasion movies or radiation monster movies, and some of them were very, very good. We've talked about them, uh, and for any age, but there hadn't been ever a movie like 2001, and movies were released differently. Then we talked a little bit about this. The premiere of 2001, Space Odyssey, was very unusually released, premiered in Washington, D.C. on April the 2nd, 1968. Now you have to understand, in April 1968, I'm 22 years old. I would turn 23 in October. I'm a 22-year-old working stiff uh, uh, typesetter in Manhattan. And it was released in Washington because of the political angle of the space program, because Lyndon Johnson was about to lose an election, but he was president, and the space program was out of Houston, and it was a political event. Then it was released, as was normal, in a premiere theater in New York City, in Times Square. I forget exactly which one, but the practice then was to release a big film in what they call a premiere print and a premiere theater in New York, and then the next day in Los Angeles, and limited release. And what that meant in those days was probably if you were in Connecticut and you wanted to see 2001, you came to Manhattan. It was only showing in one theater in that whole area. And then the only place on the West Coast you'd see it in 1968 would be Los Angeles at a premiere theater. And then limited meant probably Chicago, probably Atlanta, certainly Houston with NASA there. And then they'd wait until those theaters had had their run and then release it to the next level of theaters, and like all theaters in small towns and small cities, and then to neighborhood theaters. Might not get to a neighborhood theater for months, but I saw it at the premiere theater, and on a weekend matinee, I think it was a Sunday, uh, at the Times Square Premiere Theater, like I said, and it was a 70 millimeter print in the premiere theaters. In the other theater, it was just a regular print, but it was a 70 millimeter print, and I'd never seen a screen that big. And it was in 4-track stereophonic sound, which doesn't sound like much today, but it was a big deal then. and so the soundtrack was a sound environment that almost everybody coming to the theater, the premiere theater, had never experienced. Because even stuff recorded on 4-track, you're playing on your Victrola, your mono Victrola in our apartment, or a stereo at best. You're not listening to it the way it was recorded. So, which partly explains how for the first 10 minutes you're looking at a black screen, 10, 15 minutes, and listening to sound. Because the sound is coming from everywhere. according to the perceptions you're used to at the time. And so they were making this environment, and you're listening to this sound. And that was all very, very strange. The size of the screen was strange. And the sound was strange. Now you could never play 10, 15 minutes of music in a dark theater and get that effect. And the music was strange. Kind of electronic, weird use of strings. It wasn't music one heard until the action of the film starts, and then you see desert. And you're seeing desert for a while and nothing's happening. Especially if you're growing up in New York City like I had, you'd never seen such shots of a desert. And in fact, not many people live near deserts because they're deserts. And so this had a fascination then, those long, long shots of desert that would be underestimated now. People travel a lot more now by car. They go to the Grand Canyon and places like that. It's the tourism in the United States is much more, and so that was another fascinating and foreboding thing. And then you have something that nobody I can recall commented on at the time, and I certainly didn't know because I hadn't studied this stuff yet. But you're in a desert, you're seeing gorillas and chimpanzees, and you're seeing a dead zebra, and you're seeing a leopard. Well, none of those are desert animals. It takes pampas, it takes jungle, it takes forest to feed those kind of mammals. The amount of grass a zebra eats in a day, and zebra are herd animals, they need that pampas grass. Gorillas and chimps are forest animals. They don't live in the desert. They can't. They die pretty quick. And you have all these, so you have a very artificial situation that a scholar, an archaeologist would know at the time, a zoologist would know at the time, wait a minute, that can't be. Human beings did not evolve in deserts. There's nothing to evolve with in a desert. So you have this artificial situation that allows for the illusion of scarcity because human beings, mammals in general, evolved where they went into places that had scarcity, but basically mammals need a fairly lush, varied environment, and those are the environments they came out of, that mammals evolved from, including our hominid ancestors that these apes and chimps were looking at, that we're looking at in the film. And so he sets up this thing where the first tool was a shin bone and used to kill. And that could have happened, but it probably wasn't the first tool. And rocks were the first tools, almost certainly. And so what I'm saying isn't to nitpick. This is a very carefully created, editorialized version of evolution as the kind of Darwinian cartoon almost. And then suddenly you're in outer space. And I was just bowled over. I can't remember my reactions to the first part of it. It was so unusual that my basic reaction, and you're going up for like a half hour here, of music and darkness, and then these animals, and then the monolith, and then you're in space. You're not in space for about 25 minutes, a half hour. And then to be in space, and I'm sitting there going, this is as close as I'm ever going to get. my not giant screen, but a much bigger screen than I ever had when I was a kid, uh, I'm thinking it hasn't been improved upon. The shots of outer space that they managed to do back then, without computers, without all the fancy stuff they have now, the the sense of outer space is absolutely remarkable. Uh, we've seen now footage shot in outer space, and it looks just like that. So it wasn't only remarkable, it was prophetic. Soon we'd land on the moon. This was another thing that when the film came out, we were pretty sure we were going to land on the moon soon. And we did. We did. Was it that summer or the next summer? Anyway. And we were sure that 2001 would seem very far off. That there would be this big space station. We would be going out into space. We'd be going to Mars. Everything looked that way. We'd come so far in such a short time from putting a dog in orbit in the United States. I mean, they put people in orbit in the late 50s in Russia. But putting a dog in orbit, say in 1961, putting Alan Shepard in orbit, Scott Glenn something. I'm mixing him up with the actor.
Yeah.
I saw Scott Glenn in the movie last night.
John Glenn.
John Glenn, thank you. And he orbited once, and it was, oh my God, to people about to land on the moon, and that would be done before the end of the summer, the end of the decade, and so we were really confident we'd be on Mars and headed out into the galaxy as far as we could go by 2001. And then something very mysterious happened, and I think it has to, even though it happened after the movie, I think it has never really been sufficiently explained. The space program just stopped. Now, it was said that Nixon didn't want to continue the space program because it was a Kennedy thing. And I find that very hard to believe. Certainly the military wanted to continue the space program. But the space program as a really living, vital program just stopped. The satellite stuff didn't. The satellites got better and better, used for Earth purposes, so to speak. But the space program stopped. There was no Mars mission. It's 60 years later, and they're just starting it again after a 60-year pause. And we can't even begin to think what that cost us, and we don't really know what the reasons were. If there were conscious reasons, they haven't been revealed. The excuses people put forth just don't ring true. And it stopped. I don't want to make a mystery or a conspiracy about it, but the fact is it stopped. The fact is that the explanations are feeble, and after that we know nothing, at least in the public eye. But to emphasize, just you watching the movie, you fully expected that space station to be there in 2001. You thought you were looking at the future. And so after that, background, so to speak, why don't you take it from there? Because I'm very interested to hear what you've got to say.
Well, yeah. First of all, I agree that the optics of it are they rival anything today, and I think it's even better than a lot of the space films that I've seen today. Just the way he presents the immensity of it and the eternity of it, the vastness of space. The way he shoots it is it's almost overwhelming. But as far as in a weird way, I compared this movie to Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, because in a way, the Keir Dullea character is going through an extreme an extreme progression of an extreme like spiritual progression or experience in a very short time. And it's also um I know you haven't probably seen Eyes Wide Shut in a while, but I watched that again last week, and the same thing kind of happens to that character in that film, where he comes to like these extreme realizations about his personal life in a very short period of time, within a couple of days. But this movie is really talking about the whole spiritual progression of humanity itself, and expressing it through the experience of one man, and also making a justification for space travel that at the time I'm sure there was lots of people saying, why spend all this money on space travel when we have all these
Yes.
problems at home, the
Yeah.
you know
There
why
certainly were.
Whitey on the moon. But so I, I think what he's trying to express here is that one human being's experience, either inwardly or outwardly, which is kind of made into the same thing here, is is uh is like that statement by Neil Armstrong: one small step for man, one large step for mankind.
Mm-hmm.
That once a human being makes this progression, whether it's learning to use a tool, using his opposable thumb and picking up a tool, or or making this journey to Jupiter and going through this experience with this obelisk thing, is also making an entire progression for humanity. And
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the 100th monkey idea, that one member of a species of monkey learns how to use a tool, and then all these monkeys that
Mm-hmm.
haven't had any contact with that monkey, they're on
Right.
another island, suddenly they know how to use this tool, right? So in the beginning, with the hominids, I guess you would call them, because they're like proto humans. um
Mm-hmm.
the what you said about all those things not fitting in the desert, I think all the things have kind of a symbolical quality to them, the leopard and the
Yes,
zebra
I agree.
and all that. And I think that he's not taking a Darwinian perspective on evolution. He's taking a more occult
Mm-hmm.
perspective on evolution, and using the sun and the moon to symbolize that. And if you take the moon as kind of not the child of the earth, but the mother of the earth, in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, the material mother of the earth, the thing that like in the Hindu, they're called lunar petries. They're lunar gods, and
Mm-hmm.
these gods the build up the physical form of man, and
Mm-hmm.
as they build that form up, when it reaches a certain point, it's fit to be given a mind. When it gains, like an opposable thumb, or
Oh, I see.
a certain type of body. And then there's solar petries, which they endow that creature with mind at a certain point. So
Mm-hmm.
this is symbolized in Mount Sinai, right? The sin means sun,
Mm-hmm.
or sin means moon in
Mm-hmm.
Babylonian. So Moses on Mount Sinai really is symbolic of man reaching a certain physical place where he is then ready to be endowed with mind. So that's the
Uh-huh.
occult perspective on Moses's experience on Mount Sinai. So when we see the hominids confronting the obelisk, and we have these experiences with the hominids before the obelisk comes along, where they get into this
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
conflict the over the water hole with the other tribe, and then
Right.
and then they have this interlude with the leopard where they're like hiding from the leopard and they can't go out to get
Mm-hmm.
food because the leopard's out there, and so they're really feeling this need for for a tool or something to help them out in this situation because it is a barren landscape and they've got to eat meat and get their water and everything. So the next morning the obelisk appears, and and the obelisk is a form with right angles, and that's something very, and straight lines which don't occur in nature, and
Right.
so it's very alien to
Exactly.
them. And so I think that the symbol that appears over and over again, I think three times in this movie, where you've got the obelisk, and then behind the obelisk you've got the sun and the moon, but the moon is eclipsed in a sense, or it's a new moon. So the physical is being eclipsed by the by the mental, or the mind, or the mind endowing power of the sun behind the obelisk. Um,
The mind endowing power of the sun.
yeah,
That's really interesting.
the symbolic sun, or
Right.
the lunar Petries as they call them. But
Mm-hmm.
so after that, the next day or a couple of days later, he's the hominid is messing around, and he begins to pick up the bone and begins to smash things with
Mm-hmm.
the bone,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting that the first thing he does with this newfound power is start destroying things, right? And and
Yep.
having, he's still not this mentation is growing, and it's just about tools and getting what he needs right now. And then of course he uses the tool in a warlike manner with the other tribe of monkeys. It's also interesting that in the tribe of monkeys that starts using the bone, there's 12 members of that tribe. So in a sense, they're like the apostles of this new discovery.
Oh wow.
Yeah, everything Kubrick
You
does
didn't
has
look.
a
You counted them.
yeah, everything Kubrick does
That's
has a
great.
meaning, and I'm sure the leopard and the zebra have some kind of meaning to them too. I mean, the cat usually symbolizes the moon too, and the the black and white aspect of the zebra is interesting, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So then this tool, after they have this interaction and they're celebrating, getting the other hominids away from their water hole, they throw it up in the air, and then it's floating through the air, and then it cuts to the spacecraft floating through
Yes, it
space.
morphs into the spacecraft.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
very impressed with that.
So this is the new tool that man's learned to use,
Mm-hmm.
and he's learned to use it to take him out into space and to learn new things, and to gain knowledge, and yeah. So that's kind of an obvious allusion to the same process occurring with the evolved human. Um, and then the whole thing that takes place on the spacecraft with Hal and the two astronauts is very interesting too. And the way humans are presented in this is very subtle, because the two different astronauts, although they're that very iconic astronaut kind of uh, general personality, kind of like empty vessel country boy types, or like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if you transported a marine into space or something. um,
Yeah.
but there's these scenes with each of them where they're interacting with their with videos from their family, and
Right.
and um and Keir Dullea takes a real interest in his family, and you can tell he's sentimental about his family, while the other guy is kind of blasé, um
Mm-hmm.
with his family. And um and later on there's a scene where he's got to Keir Dullea has to enter into he has to get back into the spacecraft. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but he's got to get back into the spacecraft after Hal has shut it off, right?
Right.
But he's rescued the other astronaut. But to get back into the spacecraft, to open up the spacecraft, he's got to let go of the other. He has to let go of the other
Yeah.
guy, right? And it's like
Hmm.
I think that that's symbolic of him having to let go of his attachments to progress more. And and I think the two personalities that are very subtly shown of the astronauts kind of plays into that in a sense. But that whole there's a thing about this movie that's really kind of slapstick and funny to me in a really subtle way too. And the day after I watched it, I was thinking about it and I just started laughing. And especially the and a lot of Kubrick's movies are like that. They're very subtly. There's just something subtly comedic about them, and like the scene where the other astronaut is like floating through space uncontrolled, you know, and there's just something
Yes.
really
Yes.
kind of funny about that to me for some reason. But yeah, and then the
It
whole
also he speeds up the film a little bit when he does it.
yeah he does yeah, but that also, I mean, that all of this must have been so new to people, and just somebody floating through that vastness of space. That image is so
Yeah.
powerful. You know, like where does he end up? You know, he just floats through space for eternity, and that's interesting. But I guess the other really big theme in this movie is the relationship between Hal and Dave, and what does that relationship mean? Is Hal an obstacle that Dave has to overcome before he can interact with the obelisk, or does Hal represent some kind of a tool that's become out of control and that has become uh, kind of this all-surveying and all-powerful tool that has a that has a chance of overtaking humanity, which
Well,
could
it's
be
certainly. Yeah. Keep going. Keep going.
it could be a foretelling of artificial intelligence and its ability to take control of humanity, and how we're going to have to overcome that might be some kind of test for humanity in the future.
I think it certainly it posits that once there's enough intelligence, then there's a being. When Hal tries to save himself, he becomes a being. He's not a machine anymore.
Yeah, he gains a kind of personality. Yeah.
When he realizes they want to shut him off, he's defending himself, and he has learned to lie and and misdirect, and he sees they're going to end me. That means I'm a me. You know, I have existence, and so I deserve to live. And they're trying to end me, so I want to survive. So I'm, and he gives himself an excuse, the way countries and people always do. It's for the mission. For the mission to survive, I've got to survive. They're trying to end me. I've got to end them. And 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 then when Kirduye, Dave is his name, the character. Uh, you know, he breaks back into the ship. You know, he's rescued in the sense of his fellow astronaut, in the sense that he's not going to let the body drift away. You know, the astronaut's dead, and that's happened, but he's not going to just let it drift into space. Exactly the thing of, oh my God, this guy is going to drift, you know, forever. He's not going to do that. It's a very basic thing with humans, especially military. You don't leave anybody behind, and but in order to get into the thing, he realized he's got to. He's got no choice. Because those tools are going to get him in. So he lets it go. He forces his way in, and this surprises Hal. And then as he starts disconnecting, Hal really becomes a being. He says,
Yeah.
"I'm afraid."
Yeah, it's really
And
sad.
that's a very, yeah, it's sad and it's powerful.
Yeah.
It is, we've all felt fear. We know what he's feeling. And we really accept his beingness when he says, "I'm afraid." And he's saying, "Please." And, and of course, the astronaut Dave has to do what he's doing. At some point, I would imagine that Dave, there's never this moment, I don't think, in the picture. But I'm thinking, watching it, he knows he can't survive without Hal. He knows this is going to be it for him. But he doesn't want to be killed by Hal. So, are you hearing these beeps?
No.
No? Good. I heard a few beeps. He doesn't want to be killed by Hal. And so what Hal has done is even though he hasn't succeeded in surviving and he hasn't succeeded in defending himself, he has put the mission out of human control. Whatever's going to happen now, Houston's never going to hear of it. In terms of the movie, we never see that there's any control left. And then the ending starts to happen. The ending takes a long time. That's like a 40-minute ending. And I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. Because frankly, the first time and the second time, I'm going, "Okay, fellas, I don't get it." I'm out of
Yeah.
my depth here.
Yeah. Well, the whole part where he's, the colors are coming at him and the patterns are coming at him. Yeah, I don't really know what to say about that except that he's going through some kind of cosmic experience, and I think that there is symbolism there too, especially when the whole thing kind of calms down and turns into like seven diamonds in the sky that are revolving but I think that um, the more important part is the part where he becomes an old man. Um, I think that's kind of
He becomes three old men. He
right.
becomes an old man in a spacesuit, a kind of older man but still able to get around in that wonderful black robe.
Yeah.
And then the old man in the bed, who's
Yeah.
just this side of death.
Right. And he goes through these three stages of life in a sense, and I think at that point he's gone through this kind of psychedelic experience, but he's become a representative of humanity in general, and he so he becomes this old man, and as he's dying, the obelisk appears, and the room is set up as a kind of uh, the best aesthetics of humanity room, or traditional aesthetic humanity. And I think there's classical music playing in the background, and everything's kind of antique and beautiful. But so
I thought the art direction in those scenes was incredible.
yeah, yeah,
It sets up a unique atmosphere.
yeah,
You have this. I'm not an expert on furniture, but you have this 19th or 18th century furniture, and in this really cold sort of environment, but very warm furniture and warm in tone, and this wonderful bed die in bed, die in that bed. and and while this music, I got a little tired of the German waltzes. Okay,
Yeah.
but this music is going, and it's all in this kind of suspended state that once more I didn't understand.
Well, yeah, I think that it's about the him dying and being reborn, and
Well, there you have the most provocative image of the embryo that seems self-aware. I've seen sonars of embryos, and they don't seem self-aware.
yeah, I think
But this embryo seems self-aware.
there's meaning behind that, and he juxtaposes the embryo with the Earth. So Earth is the embryo of this awakening of humanity. Earth is humanity's embryo, in a sense.
Yes, that makes sense.
I think that's what he.
Poetic sense and logical sense, yes.
And so, and the self awareness you're talking about is what has, there's a progressive self awareness in humanity, as this process of mentation or mindfulness progresses over time. Man becomes more and more conscious of self, and his place in the universe, and his sense of universal brotherhood. And I think that embryo juxtaposed against the entire Earth is kind of saying all of humanity is going through this experience, and this one guy, and this again is the justification for the kind of overall justification, para justification for the space program, is that if we go out on this new frontier, even if it's one guy doing it, he's doing this for all of humanity, and this is a giant step for humanity. This program, and that's why it's worth it to do this. That's why it's worth it to spend all this money on this and resources on it. But yeah, it's the whole scene in the antique room with the old man is very interesting, and there's things within it that I haven't really figured out, like why it seems that when he's eating and he breaks his glass, there's something about that triggers something. But another thing about that is that in that room, in that scene, the sound is very distinct. There's a distinct sound environment in that room, and you can hear things kind of banging around in the background of that scene, like as if he's being observed by other forces in the background. Like there's something in the other rooms or above him, or something observing what he's doing in that room. And I think that was intentional on Kubrick's part. That there are forces, like I was talking about the solar Petries or the lunar Petries, there are other beings that are higher than man, that are overlooking this process, and
Yes.
kind of engineering it in a sense.
Yes, because they presumably are the entities that put the monolith there in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Somebody had to create this monolith because it is at right angles and it's so clean, and it's something designed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a, you want to say human, but there aren't really the words. It's like what came out of creation doesn't have right angles, doesn't have straight lines. You see it when you're flying, especially over the desert. A straight line means people are there. But out of creation came this being, whether these are aliens, whether they're us, that uses right angles, that uses straight lines. And so this is a being related to us or creating us, or the monolith radiates a kind of capacity for intelligence. And then this passes through all the stages of the film. It's interesting, when I think of iconic images from the film, there's the monolith, there's the face of the embryo. You see that a lot. That's around a lot. And maybe I'm missing something, but those are the two big ones.
Yeah. The old man reaches out from bed towards the monolith and and then shows a circular kind of proto embryo, and then it cuts to the embryo with its eyes open, and then it cuts to the moon. It cuts to just a picture of the moon, and you go down from the moon and it shows Earth, and then over to the left side is the embryo. And so it's an interesting progression, because each of the different forms of Dave, it shows the astronaut and the old man in the robe looking at each other, and then it shows the old man in the robe at the table looking over at the maybe the glass breaking on the table is his body breaking down, or his vessel breaking, and he looks over and the old man's in the bed, and yeah, and then it goes on from there. But yeah, it's interesting. The more you look at it, the more you can see.
Yeah, what?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Is this the first film Kubrick made after Dr. Strangelove?
I think so.
I think so too. The IMDb entry on Kubrick is very confusing. I don't know what they're doing, but it's not very linear. But I think it's the first film he made after Strangelove. Now, in the 50s, Kubrick made Paths of Glory, right?
Right.
Okay, I thought so. Good. My memory isn't totally gone. Now, I think I told you I saw that film by myself in a movie theater at about the age of 12 or earlier, and it completely terrified me. That was horror to me, not Frankenstein. I could deal with Frankenstein. This was something inhuman action. Inhuman action in humans is what I meant to say. And then he makes Dr. Strangelove, which is funny, but which is an even bleaker film than Paths of Glory.
I think he makes Lolita before Doctor Strangelove.
Right, he makes Lolita. That's the film I was trying to remember.
But if you want to talk about good film noir movies, is it The Killers or The Killing? The
Killing.
Sterling Hayden. Yeah.
Yeah, Sterling Hayden.
That's a great film noir movie. That was one we forgot when we talked about that.
I haven't seen that in ages and ages and ages. You're right. We totally forgot that one. Speaking of movies we forgot, I watched the other day on YouTube a movie I'd never seen that has a real reputation as a war movie, but it wasn't produced by a studio. It was an indie, which is so rare then. Directed by William Wellman, The Story of G.I. Joe.
Huh.
about Ernie Pyle, and it's on YouTube. It's one of the best war films I've ever seen because you almost never see battle. You see some battle, just enough, but basically you're seeing guys getting bombarded. You're seeing the life of this platoon. Uh, they don't name the battle, but it's Monte Cassino in Italy, where for I think weeks the whole Allied advance up Italy was stopped because the high command didn't want to destroy this priceless casino, cathedral kind of structure at the top. It was a medieval structure. They wanted not to destroy it. The Germans used it as an observation post, and after it was destroyed, the Germans used it as a fort. And you're just following this one platoon, and Burgess Meredith playing Ernie Pyle. And in any case, that's kind of a long parenthesis. That's when we're talking about war movies. I'd never seen that movie. I'd heard about it all my life, and finally decided to search for it, and it was on YouTube. In any case, so you've got Paths of Glory, then Lolita, which is a bleak film too, in its way, funny. Then you've got Dr. Strangelove, which is coming right around the Cuban Missile Crisis, so it's really scaring the piss out of us. Then you have this film that is strangely hopeful, full of all these cosmic, and I use the word really descriptively, not
Yeah.
sometimes they use the word cosmic as a kind of denigrating word.
Right.
But all these cosmic images that as I was watching, Jazz and I were watching, the thing goes on for 2.5 hours. Not that much happens, and yet Jazz didn't fall asleep. And after a long day of work, she fall asleep easily with the movie. We're both fascinated the whole time. Even sometimes when I'm cursing the movie, I'm fascinated by it. Then comes Clockwork Orange. And when I start to think about that, that's a movie that once it started to get weird, I walked out. I'd never seen that picture. I did not want to see that kind of viciousness.
Yeah.
And apparently, didn't you tell me that movie scared Kubrick?
Yeah. He was afraid he was gonna have a home invasion like the one in the movie, but the
Yeah. So, I mean, a movie that scares its maker, that's a scary movie.
yeah, I the movie that I think is the most similar in pacing to me, and that's a something that I think is very important in Kubrick is the rhythm of his films. There's a very definite rhythm
Yes,
to everything.
absolutely.
Um, Very similar in pacing to me is Barry Lyndon because that's another movie.
That is another movie I was trying to think of.
Right. That's another movie that's very you could call it very slow and very it takes its time in each scene um and it's a very quiet film, but you don't get bored watching it. The
Right.
partly because the whole visuals of the movie are so lush, and I guess he used a whole new type of lens or something for the candlelight, the indoor candlelight effect that's in the film. But but yeah, the whole lighting and the whole cinematography of the film is very interesting. But he there's another thing about Kubrick that's really interesting to me, and is that he gets groups of Americans very well, like it in Doctor Strangelove, he really nails that military hierarchy
Yes.
personality
Yes.
really well. That only an American who had really interacted with those kind of people can really understand.
Right.
And then the whole astronaut space program personality, somehow he got that down really well. And and in the film Full Metal Jacket, he got that. He absolutely got that Marine culture down
Right.
perfectly. And he seems to be very good at that, as getting these different hierarchical cultures on. He gets them right on spot in his films.
But speaking of hierarchies, uh, one way this film is very dated is it's all white men, and it's all men in positions of authority. It is some women appear there, those sort of robotic stewardesses.
No,
I
they
think
don't.
there's a woman in the Russian contingent.
No, they don't. The women were totally represented as scientists and on the board at the conference and all that.
Yes, you're right. They were there, but the movers and shakers were all men, and and white, and they wanted their Christian name, uh, and those things had dated. That part of that cultural stuff couldn't help but date. Uh, in a funny way, that Alfredo bring me the head of Alfredo Garcia is not dated. Uh, uh, that could have been made last week, except for the cars. Uh, but but going back to the basic thing of 2001, it gives you space. It gives you the vastness of space, and beyond all any meaning it could have, it's as close as any of us, or most of us, let's put it that way, are going to get to being out there. And that was my feeling at the end of the film. When I saw it the first time and when I saw it this week. Uh, uh, there it is. That's what we're in the midst of.
You know,
And
it's funny because
yeah,
I think that he's actually parodying the waspiness of the space program in this
I
too.
think you're right. I think you're absolutely right.
Because that main guy, the main guy that comes upon the monolith on the moon and everything, that guy is such
Yeah,
a wasp stereotype, right? But yeah,
I think you're right. I think it is parody.
have you ever
But as you
seen?
say, you could. Yeah, go on.
No, you go ahead because I'm changing the subject.
Well,
Okay.
as you say, an after effect of a Kubrick film, you realize, wait a minute, he was kidding.
Yeah, yeah.
Wait a minute, that was funny.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. No, I was going to ask you if you've ever seen Waterloo with Rod
Uh,
Steiger as Napoleon.
no.
This is you've got to
Yeah.
see this movie. I don't know if it just disappeared. It came out in I think 1970, I think, but an amazing movie. They made it in Ukraine and they used Russian troops and they used something like 30,000 troops or something
My God.
to recreate Waterloo. They spent million. Well, actually, they didn't spend that much money on it because Russia gave them 4 million, and then they got like 14 million or something from the studios in different places. But I forget who directed it, but it's an amazing film. Rod Steiger's the best Napoleon I've ever seen, and um, and the battle scenes are
Well, there was
just. Go ahead.
there was a time for about 10 years. Rod Steiger was one of the best actors in the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But the battle scenes are just amazing. It's like nothing I've ever seen. I'd be surprised if people didn't actually get killed making the movie, but they had just the volume of people that they had on the battlefield is and they show like aerial shots of all the troops and all the movements of the troops, but with real people. It's
That's
incredible.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah, you
But
got to see it.
I've got to tell you, well, I'll look that up. I just wrote it down.
Yeah.
I'll find it. But I've got to tell you my final confession about 2001.
Okay.
Uh, I'm 22, and it's the spring, and I walk out of this movie on Times Square, when, as I've said, Times Square was funky then. Uh, and I am kind of turned all around and elated and depressed at the same time, and I don't have any cosmic references. I'm just going, what did I just see? I mean, I know I've seen something amazing, but what did I just see? And I thought to myself, I want to see a movie that entertains me right now. And I got on a crosstown bus, and I saw Barbarella.
That's great.
And that was my response to 2001.
Yeah.
I was very entertained by Barbarella.
That's a great night. That sounds like a good night. Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we stop there?